Pittsburgh, 2009, the U.S. pointed the finger at Iran.
Yesterday, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France presented detailed evidence to the IAEA demonstrating that the Islamic Republic of Iran has been building a covert uranium enrichment facility for several years.
This is the
Iran's leaders immediately suspected spies in their ranks. Orders were given to hunt down those who had disclosed nuclear secrets. In the process, Iranian intelligence came across an encrypted platform where CIA agents exchanged information.
The Iranians, who were also very active in Iraq, had somehow been able to compromise that system.
If Iran could crack the secret CIA messages, the lives of hundreds of agents would be in danger.
With supercomputer-generated cryptographic systems, you need a supercomputer to attack it.
China has some of the world's fastest supercomputers and good relations with Iran.
So it may be that the Iranians passed the intercept over to the Chinese. They processed it. They were able to decrypt it.
With the help of the decrypted messages, the Iranians exposed a ring of CIA agents. The discovery had unexpected consequences. Several from the CIA switched sides.
A number of important cases of CIA officers who were turned by the Chinese and were working for them.
Most damaging to the CIA was Jerry Lee's betrayal. From 2010, he helped Chinese intelligence unmask at least 20 CIA informants in the country. They were jailed or executed. In one case, the punishment was especially cruel.
Not only was the spy executed, but also his pregnant wife was executed as well. This was done on closed-circuit television so that the people in the ministry where he worked could witness the event.
China's intelligence operations range from extremely brutal to almost silent.
A former senior official in the NSA said that Russia is like a hurricane and China is like climate change.
I think that in the 2020s, we'll probably see the Chinese spying the heck out of us. On the other hand, we'll be spying the heck out of them.
In mid-2019, a Chechen man was crossing Berlin's Tiergarten Park. The man was living in Germany under a false name. Out of nowhere, a cyclist appeared, carrying a pistol with a silencer attached. The victim, Zalim Khan Khangoshvili, was shot 3 times. For years, he had fought against Russia as a militia leader in the Caucasus.
The victim had a really checkered history in the Chechen wars. After that, it was clear that Georgian intelligence had maybe recruited him isn't the right phrase, but he definitely cooperated with them. He was used for negotiations, for example.
In 2001, Khangoshvili joined the Chechnyan military resistance movement, which later became the Islamist Caucasus Emirate.
After an apparent attack on him was only narrowly stopped in Georgia, he went to Ukraine. His contact from the Georgian intelligence service is still working there today. That means Russia must have considered this man an enemy 2 or even 3 times over. That apparently put him on a Russian intelligence death list.
There are said to be as many as 20 targets on that list. Russia wants revenge. The suspect in the Khangoshvili killing is also suspected of a 2013 shooting that was caught on camera in Moscow. There, too, a bike was involved. The suspect is Vadim Krasikov, a former soldier.
Because of a lack of Russian cooperation on this issue, we've expelled 2 Russian embassy employees from the country.
But Vladimir Putin was unmoved.
Это боевик, причем очень жесткий и кровавый человек. Российская сторона неоднократно ставила.
The Russian side had repeatedly asked our German colleagues for the extradition of this bandit, this murderer. Unfortunately, there was no agreement on the issue.
Не нашли взаимопонимания.
The world of intelligence services can be brutal.
It also signals the extent of one's power to other nations. When it comes to achieving goals through lethal and military means, restraint has fallen away because the international community simply hasn't done enough to correct the situation. It's effective, so it's used with less and less restraint.
When the suspect went on trial in Berlin, Russia and its intelligence services were also on the dock. The accused denied everything, calling it a case of mistaken identity. Was the Park murder also a way of sending a message to Germany?
As intelligence agencies would see it, the act didn't really concern Germany. Like other states, they reserve the right to hunt anyone they deem a terrorist anywhere in the world, and if necessary, shoot them dead.
Traitors faced the same fate. Defector Sergei Skripal was poisoned in England.
These especially sensational cases take place according to time and opportunity. Think about it. If Mr. Skripal had lived in Berlin, there would have been another Tiergarten case. For years, Russian intelligence has had a policy of punishing traitors wherever they live.
It wasn't always that way. In the Cold War, spies like Rudolf Abel were exchanged for U.S. prisoners, often in Potsdam on the outskirts of Berlin, under the watchful eyes of the Stasi. But even then, murders also took place. In 1954, KGB defector Nikolai Khokhlov told Western media that he was ordered to poison a dissident in Germany using a poisoned dart from a cigarette case. Khokhlov's family was then sent to a labor camp.
As far as Western Europe was concerned, both superpowers turned away from Secret Service assassinations because many cases led to a huge public media outcry around the world, and they wanted to avoid that.
Cases like that of Georgy Markov were too sensational. The Bulgarian was murdered in London in 1978 using a poisoned bullet fired from an umbrella. The U.S. too plotted assassinations as revealed to Congress in 1975.
Have you brought with you some of those devices which would have enabled the CIA to use this poison for,
we have indeed,
for killing people? Don't point it at me. Does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman. It fires a small dart.
In the U.S., it was domestic scandals following Watergate that led to Secret Service assassinations being officially banned by the president.
Since 2002, the CIA seems to once again find any means justified. This is Mazuria in eastern Poland, far from the capital, Warsaw, and near the border with Belarus. Hidden in a forest is a Polish Secret Service facility. This is where the CIA has taken members of Al-Qaeda and other terrorism suspects. Once in Poland, they were tortured by CIA agents. Similar things have happened in Bagram in Afghanistan and Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, where the torture included humiliation. In Poland, prisoners were interrogated using illegal methods as ordered by CIA leadership. Even today, the area is under tight security. Military police follow our camera team. We're filmed and our cars searched. In 2017, a civil lawsuit by inmates revealed the extent of CIA practices. Lawyers for a victim interviewed Jose Rodriguez, a former CIA covert operations officer.
Just so that the record is clear, the techniques for which you sought approval were the attention grasp, walling, facial hold, facial slap, cramped confinement, wall standing, stress positions, sleep deprivation, waterboard, use of diapers, insects, and mock burial. Now, I'm not asking what got approved. I'm asking whether those were the techniques for which you requested approval.
Yes.
Today is January 16th.
The CIA hired psychologist James E. Mitchell and paid his company $81 million to develop enhanced interrogation methods.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the request of Gibbons, PC.
The first victim was Al-Qaeda member Abu Zubaydah.
Why was he waterboarded after he started cooperating?
You'd have to ask the CIA why they wanted to continue doing that.
Well, I was the head of it, and my analysts were concerned that perhaps he was not compliant.
Abu Zubaydah was among those tortured for weeks in Poland. He lost an eye.
Were they there voluntarily?
They were not there voluntarily, but they could stop the interrogation if they agreed to comply.
The prisoners were later sent from Poland to Guantanamo Bay. There, too, the CIA and FBI used torture.
I was through 70 days of intensive torture, no sleep, sexual assault, beating, no medication, no food. I'm not allowed to go to the bathroom. I have to pee and do everything in my clothes. You know, because I was chained, and then they say either I beg them or I do in my clothes. And I chose to do in my clothes.
Former police officers were also involved in trying to get the prisoners to talk.
Lieutenant Richard Zuli, he is a police officer from Chicago. He gave me a letter. In that letter, it says that my mother would be kidnapped and put in a prison where there were only men. My heart dropped, and I knew at that moment that there was nothing to lose.
For several years, Mohammed al-Salahi had contact with al-Qaeda terrorists. He knew followers of Osama bin Laden. He also met students from the so-called Hamburg cell. Among the group were would-be terrorists, including Mohammed Atta and Ziad Jarrah. They were later tasked with quickly learning how to pilot a large plane. The pair were regular visitors to Steindamm, a main Hamburg street and home to a Salafist mosque, where they made friends with others, including Ramzi bin al-Shibh, who became the group's leader. Later in 2003, bin al-Shibh was tortured and interrogated for weeks and accused al-Sulahi of being the person who had told the 9/11 pilots how to get to Afghanistan.
We have some problems over here right now. We might have a hijack over here, two of them.
Is that American 11 trying to call?
We have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We are turning to the airport. If you try to make any move, you'll danger yourself and the airplane.
Another one just hit the building. Wow. Another one just hit the west side. The whole building just came apart. Holy smokes.
The attacks on New York and Washington left around 3,000 people dead and forever changed the United States. George W. Bush had been president for a few months. He called on the international community to fight a war on terror. There is universal support for the American people, sadness in their voice, but understanding that we have just seen the first war of the 21st century.
But now that war has been declared on us, we will lead the world to victory,
Intelligence agencies were charged with ensuring that victory, especially the CIA.
One of the most famous covert op figures in American history, Cofer Black, famously said to Congress, there was a before 9/11 and an after 9/11. He says, after 9/11, the gloves came off.
Beginning in 2002, the CIA built secret torture prisons, not only in Poland, but also in Romania. Al-Qaeda members were interrogated in these so-called black sites. In Thailand, a Vietnam War-era surveillance facility became a torture prison. From Guantanamo Bay in Cuba to Eastern Europe to Asia, the CIA's black sites cover the globe.
The cooperation of foreign countries in the CIA's detention and interrogation program was absolutely essential. There was no way to do this program on U.S. soil. The CIA needed the cooperation of foreign officials, and they're willing to pay for that cooperation.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. We choose freedom and the dignity of every life.
One of the things that George W. Bush said after 9/11, those people attacked us because of our way of life, but we will never abandon our way of life. Ironically, the first thing that they did, they abandoned their way of life of democracy, freedom, and that was the real win of the extremists.
The USA waged war in Afghanistan and in Iraq, where the justification was supposed weapons of mass destruction. In doing so, they made enemies of Muslims the world over. Milan in 2003, Abu Omar was snatched from the street after midday prayers. The operation was carried out by 23 CIA agents, including Portuguese operative Sabrina de Souza. The CIA wasn't concerned about breaking Italian law. Tel Aviv in Israel, for decades a hotbed of conflict. In the mid-1990s, gestures towards peace were once again shattered. This time a bus bombing carried out by Islamist Palestinians. Most of the bombs had been constructed by Yahya Ayash. In 1996, an informant working for Israel's Shin Bet domestic intelligence service slipped him a cell phone containing Semtex, an explosive. The device exploded, killing Ayash. Israel's foreign intelligence service Mossad also carries out assassinations. At the time, it was led by Shabtai Shavit.
Is targeted killing a good and effective strategy? Yes. Why? Let's say I'm trying to find and eliminate the leader of a terrorist group, and he knows it. Then he'll spend half his time protecting himself. That's time he then can't use to organize terror.
The lengths to which Mossad goes can be seen in this surveillance camera footage from a hotel in Dubai. In 2010, Israeli agents disguised as tourists pursued a target, Mahmoud al-Mabou, a high-ranking Hamas member. A Mossad operative suffocated the man in his room with a pillow.
They made a mistake, which the then head of Mossad has since admitted. The operation had to be carried out so quickly that Mossad didn't have enough time to produce false identities. So individuals had to travel under the same identity again and again.
Mossad agents were unmasked. Such teams aren't always that big. In 1995 in Malta, an agent shot dead the head of the Islamic Jihad group, Fatih Shakaki. The terrorist group was weakened for months.
In the past, the assassination of leaders has sometimes led to the destruction of their entire organizations.
Israel's greatest foe, Iran, has shown that it has nuclear ambitions of its own. In 2021, it tested a missile capable of reaching space. Nuclear missiles would pose a serious threat to the small country that is already targeted by conventional rockets fired by Palestinian groups. In 2018, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu didn't mince words in front of the cameras.
Iran lied. Big time. After signing the nuclear deal in 2015, Iran intensified its efforts to hide its secret nuclear file.
But Israel didn't stop at accusations in the media. Using guns and explosives, Mossad agents also killed several Iranian nuclear scientists. In Iran, the murdered scientists were celebrated as martyrs. A key part of the plan was to form new organizations to continue the work. This is how Dr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, head of the Project Ahmad, put it. Remember that name. In November 2020, the head of Iran's nuclear program was attacked while driving with his wife. Mossad had set up a disguised machine gun and triggered it remotely. The nuclear scientist had no chance. Iran announced it would retaliate.
So many Iranians have been killed around the world in recent years. Did it start a war? No.
Intelligence agencies carry out their orders.
In democracies, the government is responsible for intelligence agencies. It can't escape that responsibility.
Los Angeles. For many years, Michael German worked in the city as an FBI agent. At times, he did undercover work, infiltrating right-wing terror groups.
Terrorism is a tactic, and what I learned working undercover in far-right militant groups was that it is a sign of weakness. So for a group to be using this tactic is a clue right away that they are very weak.
Unaware. In 1991, Los Angeles and the entire U.S. were shaken by the police violence against Rodney King. Amid huge divisions in the country, German infiltrated California's neo-Nazi scene. The undercover agent tried to comprehend the extreme right.
These individuals, they're not just in their own world making their own decisions, they're often reacting to things the government does. During the time that I was undercover, that was the Ruby Ridge siege. It was during Waco when a horrible siege and inferno killed dozens of people.
In 1993, the FBI raided a cult in Waco, Texas. Around 80 people died.
It's hard to convince somebody to become a fugitive for the rest of their life. But if the government is engaging in activities, torture, kidnappings, detention without a trial, then you're going to increase the risk that one of these people is going to take matters into their own hand.
At the end of 2001, the conquest of Afghanistan was celebrated as a triumph in the war on terror. In Bagram near Kabul, U.S. soldiers began torturing their prisoners. They saw almost everyone as an enemy.
You have to look at what the intelligence was at the time. The apparatus of Al-Qaeda was roughly 4,000 to 5,000 people. And that doesn't justify a huge ramping up in government authority, expenditures in wars in multiple countries.
The masterminds on the war on terror were men like U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld.
Part of it was, we want a generational war that will be like the Cold War, where we can justify any expenditure, we can justify complete secrecy without any sort of interference from overseers in Congress or certainly the public.
It wasn't just the military and the CIA that were involved in underhand operations. The FBI were too.
There's a narrative that the FBI management said to their agents, don't participate in torture sessions. And if they ever got to a point where they thought it was going too far along, they should just invite themselves to leave. That, in fact, was never true.
The FBI shows up, talking to you. We are good guys who bring you coffee, but they know that you talk to them because you have been tortured, And this is like very evil. FBI is as bad as the military, as bad as the CIA. So make no mistake, FBI agent, when they came to Guantanamo Bay, they wanted to bury me alive.
The war on terror was beginning to threaten freedom and the rule of law.
As we wage the war on terror overseas, we're also going after the terrorists here at home.
A powerful national counterterrorism center was charged with keeping al-Qaeda and many others in its sights.
The theory was that people get infected with some radical idea, and that puts them on a path towards committing a terrorist act. So instead of looking at those 5,000 people who were part of al-Qaeda on 9/11, we're looking at 1 million people.
Once suspected, an individual was always a potential threat.
The Patriot Act has helped save American lives, and it's protected American liberty.
They were looking at everyone, including every American, and gathering our information with the idea that somehow they would be able to sift it and find out which of us were going to be a threat in the future.
Barack Obama took over the apparatus and continued to expand it. And his successors aren't cutting the intelligence budget either. Though the current amount is secret, in 2010, an estimated $80 billion went to 17 intelligence agencies. And the U.S. is blanketed by an almost continuous network of intelligence sites.
Over the last 10 years, Congress has been trying to figure that out. How many people are part of this apparatus? When Congress asked every department head to identify the number of people with clearances that they're responsible for, they couldn't do it. And they didn't even know how many people that they had given clearance to.
The digital revolution has prompted a kind of gold rush among intelligence agencies around the world. Laws hardly count for anything anymore. The tools that had been intended to protect the public had been in many ways used to attack the public. Flagrant violations of U.S. law, constitutional rights, and more importantly, human rights. What do you do when the most powerful institutions in society have become the least accountable to society? Edward Snowden's leaked NSA documents hinted at a massive extent of surveillance. They also incriminated Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, the BND. In 2014, a Bundestag committee investigated how far the cooperation between the agencies went.
Thomas Drake was with the NSA for 7 years. The former intelligence officer made serious accusations, saying the BND supplied the US with data for drone warfare, that it was an arm of the NSA.
The NSA sent search terms, and the BND provided the data. Constitutional rights were being systematically undermined. One intelligence agency was searching national data for digital traces on behalf of the other. A devastating system. As they hunt for as much data as possible, intelligence agencies need helpers.
Our governments understood we are going to need a lot of data about what people are up to. So we're going to let the market take care of it, and then that will be the place where we dip our straws and we can just slurp up the data that we need, and that's how we're going to connect the dots. That allowed these companies to pursue these very strange arrangements where we think we're searching on Google, but they're actually capturing every aspect of our online behavior in order to mine it for predictive signals.
Every year, the extent of the surveillance increases. In the state of Utah, the NSA has huge server parks. They can theoretically store and analyze all of the world's digital data, but information alone can't prevent terrorist attacks.
There was an investigation before the 9/11 Commission demonstrating that the 9/11 conspiracy was lost in the vast streams of data that were being collected on a regular basis. The problem was, by the time their report came out, those vast streams had already turned into raging rivers.
In November 2009, a U.S. soldier shot and killed 13 people at Fort Hood. The FBI had had the perpetrator in its sights for some time.
Pick any of the successful plots that weren't stopped after 9/11. Fort Hood is a good example because the former FBI director, William Webster, ran a commission, and what they found was that there were concrete pieces of evidence that suggested that something was wrong with his communications, but the data explosion within the FBI obscured those pieces so that critical pieces were missed.
Other attackers have also evaded FBI and CIA despite all their data, like those in Orlando and Manchester.
One can certainly say that a lot of things have slipped since September 11th. But it's now 2 decades later, and I think you really have to critically evaluate what went well and what went badly, and then also scale things back. Things didn't happen that way, and it remains a problem to this day.
These days, U.S. intelligence agencies can monitor and even kill suspects in almost any corner of the world.
The CIA employed and decided on drone attacks. At the end of the day, it's highly problematic when an intelligence agency gets its hands on that kind of weaponry in the first place.
President George W. Bush laid the groundwork for his successor.
The step from torture and interrogation to targeted killings happened under Obama.
To do nothing in the face of terrorist networks would invite far more civilian casualties. Simply put, these strikes have saved lives.
Of course, Obama decided on and supported the massive expansion of the drone program and targeted killings, which, globally speaking, continue to be basically the most serious crimes committed in the name of the state.
The drones don't kill just terrorists.
In places like Yemen and Pakistan, they've ended up terrorizing whole swaths of land and people living there. This creates a never-ending cycle of violence. And it doesn't combat terrorism, it feeds terrorism.
Even with drones, the covert war on terror cannot be won.
It's well documented that this methodology we have of creating this secret compartmentalized part of our government that we don't ask about leads to considerable waste and abuse. There are estimates that just the effort in the quote-unquote war on terrorism was a $6 trillion expense.
Since 2001, secret operations and violence have taken precedence over diplomacy. For Jason Blazakis, who is deployed in Kabul for years, it's the wrong strategy.
To me, it is one of the great mistakes of the United States has ever made in the context of trying to counter terror, because all that did was create more terrorists. So you have a medicization of terrorism. And I think a large part of that is because groups like Al-Qaeda, groups like ISIS have been able to take a message that the United States has carried out terrible torture, and has killed innocent civilians, and have been able to effectively market that to audiences who have then eventually joined groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
After the American withdrawal, the threat of terrorist violence has grown in Afghanistan. An offshoot of the Islamic State used a suicide bomber to kill dozens of people. The U.S. responded with a drone strike. But its intelligence was wrong, and the strike hit the wrong people. Consequences for such actions seem to be lacking. Even revelations about the use of torture in 2014 didn't end careers at the CIA.
There was a success in this approval of this near 7,000-page report, which is the largest report in Senate history. But it's also important to recognize that the very same committee that approved this report also voted to confirm Gina Haspel, who was involved in the torture program, as CIA director just a few years after completing that torture report.
It has been nearly 50 years since an operations officer rose up through the ranks to become the director, and after the experience of the last 2 months, I think I know why that is.
CIA officers don't have to fear punishment, and they can bend the truth to suit themselves.
Have you consulted with President Trump or members of his administration with regard to quote-unquote bringing back torture?
No. Well, we never used torturers. I don't know what you're talking about.
The CIA doesn't refer to torture, just to interrogation methods that get results.
We conducted this review over a number of years in a basement with no windows, just computers hooked up to a server, and that server is where the CIA produced these 6.3 million pages of records. And what we saw in those classified pages again and again and again was that when detainees were tortured, they fabricated information. In other words, they told the interrogators exactly what they wanted to hear.
Jones sifted through years of CIA data. He was probably spied on himself.
At one point, they went into the computers that were being used by the Senate Intelligence Committee staff, went through the emails, went through the same time messages of staff, and certainly went through drafts of the report, reportedly.
A U.S. intelligence agency breaking into the networks of its own Senate?
I have grave concerns that the CIA's search may well have violated the separation of powers principles embodied in the United States Constitution.
CIA hacking into, Senate computers, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, we wouldn't do that.
Ms. Kress, nice to see you again.
The CIA denies the accusation, instead accusing Daniel Jones of betraying secrets.
Study on the CIA detention.
The senators of the committee
interrogation
said at the time the criminal referral against staff that was, again, later found to be fabricated by the CIA were all tactics to delay oversight.
Is the CIA in danger of spinning out of control?
The Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee were not briefed on the CIA's detention interrogation program until the same day President Bush made a public revelation about the program in September of 2006. The CIA itself also found that it hadn't briefed President Bush on the program until years later. I thought there would be real bipartisan outrage at the fact that the CIA knowingly provided false information to the President of the United States and, of course, Congress and the Department of Justice.
Officials like Michael Hayden, a former NSA and CIA chief, have downplayed the issue.
It was CIA officers and ex-CIA officers, for the most part, on television continuing to push the same misinformation. I think we have a real accountability crisis in our country, and we know the CIA director was trying to mislead, again, the president, Congress, and the American people, and there are zero consequences for that.
Germany has also been affected. The war on terror is filling the ranks of potential terrorist attackers. Among them was Anis Amri, who murdered 12 people in Berlin in 2016, despite the fact that German intelligence had informants among the people he associated with.
We had information from the State Intelligence Agency of Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. An informant apparently said that Anis Amri had connections to a large family in Berlin that itself was said to have connections to organized crime. Law enforcement couldn't follow up in time because the State Intelligence Agency didn't disclose the information.
Information that could have saved lives wasn't revealed, even after the attack.
The problem is that the question of whether Amri had accomplices in the attack has been completely sidelined. There's a very real danger that suspected accomplices are still out there.
Information about undercover informants remains secret. Meanwhile, potential accomplices are spared.
I was also on the second investigative committee into the NSU terror cell and experienced exactly the same thing there. Lawmakers have no insight or very little insight into the activities of informants. The committee was also denied the opportunity to call as a witness the leader of the informants, who was presumably directly involved with Anis Amri. We filed a complaint with the Federal Constitutional Court, but it was unsuccessful.
In February 2021, the German Constitutional Court decided that a person deploying informants was not accountable to Parliament.
From the point of view of the former government, the court ruled that the whole landscape of secret informants could completely escape parliamentary oversight. In my opinion, that's an act of madness. It delegitimizes the whole field. Especially in the difficult times we're living through, I think it's a serious mistake for our constitutional state. I do believe that we need intelligence services, because it's just objectively the case that there are massive attacks on our rule of law, on our country, and on Europe, from all sorts of places.
Germany is an intelligence battlefield with Russian, Chinese, Iranian, Turkish, and American operatives spying and violating German laws.
When it comes to the politics of security, there are many more actors than there used to be. Well, those actors did exist in the past, but they weren't as relevant as the big players. In fact, it would have been wise to keep a closer eye on them as well.
So, should Germany try to compete?
People in this country have the right for Germany to be different than unjust regimes and dictatorships, where people are monitored in a way that is similar to the East German Stasi apparatus.
I think it's going to be a bigger problem moving forward as more populous nations like China and India become ascendant. What kind of model have we created for them other than they can do what they want by force?
Secret services continue to gain power, and some have developed a dangerous life of their own. Only spectacular individual cases find their way into the news. The rest remain hidden in the shadows.